It was precisely 41 minutes past 3 in the afternoon on the 7th of February, 2026, when the atmospheric tapestry draping North Rodeo Drive experienced an extraordinary and sudden transformation, departing from its customary air of subdued magnificence and suddenly becoming imbued with an almost palpable energy. One might even describe it as a high-voltage charge crackling in the air. Into this newly charged environment stepped Meghan Markle, her presence artfully veiled behind the expansive shadow cast by dark-tinted eyewear and further cloaked within the luxurious expanse of a bespoke cape coat, rendered in the purest ivory hue, which seemed to intrinsically broadcast an aura of quiet, unostentatious affluence. She proceeded with a measured grace, a deliberate elegance characteristic of an individual accustomed to the world clearing its path before her, fully expecting the predictable choreography of high-end retail interactions. The requisite, softly spoken welcome, the smooth escort into a privileged, private viewing salon, and the complete, unwavering, and almost worshipful attention of a senior member of the boutique's management staff. Yet, the greeting awaiting her was an unforeseen obstruction, a barrier to entry so absolute it seemed to possess no parallel in recent history. Directly interposed between her and the renowned facade featuring the iconic, interlocking double C insignia stood a duo of security personnel, figures whose stillness was as profound and unyielding as if they had been painstakingly sculpted from solid granite. There was no hint of a welcoming smile to be discerned, nor any evidence of the customary, hurried mobilization to summon an executive from the sales floor to attend to her arrival. One of these sentinels, a gentleman who had undoubtedly witnessed the parade of countless celebrated personalities pass through that selfsame entryway over the years, simply fixed his gaze upon her and articulated 10 precise words. Words that were destined, in the immediate future, to send reverberations of shock across the very bedrock of the international garment industry. "We have been instructed not to accommodate you at this time." For someone who had, until this very juncture, been widely lauded as the very embodiment of contemporary inspiration for venerable heritage fashion houses, this moment represented a stunning and utterly public descent from grace, a breathtaking reversal of established expectations. This singular occurrence was emphatically not to be dismissed as a minor scheduling oversight, nor could it be construed as a simple misunderstanding regarding a previously reserved time slot, nor was it attributable to the establishment temporarily closing its doors for an exclusive private function. Instead, this was the tangible manifestation of a deliberate, final, and internationally promulgated directive that had journeyed all the way from the venerable central headquarters of Chanel, situated upon the famed Rue Cambon in Paris. This decision was characterized by a rarity and a totality of scope that caused those within the most confidential echelons of the fashion institution to speak of it in hushed tones, referring to it as the ultimate, or perhaps the nuclear option. Within the high-stakes lexicon governing the conduct of the House of Chanel, this action transcended a mere denial of admission. It constituted a comprehensive act of institutional nullification. Potential followers are strongly encouraged to subscribe to the relevant channel to ensure they remain fully apprised of every subsequent development in this unfolding sartorial saga. A considerable assembly of onlookers, including several staff members peering out from the neighboring establishment belonging to Dior, bore silent witness as the Duchess appeared to undergo a sudden, internal freezing process. Her fingers remained locked around her mobile communication device, suspended mid-composition of a message, her entire physical bearing becoming utterly rigid beneath the intense, unsparing scrutiny of the bright California sunshine. For a span of several moments, the ensuing silence was so profound that it was almost physically painful to endure. Then, the carefully maintained facade of composure began its inevitable collapse. Eyewitness accounts detailed that she commenced pacing with the jerky, repetitive motions reminiscent of a wind-up automaton, her vocal projections steadily escalating as she initiated what appeared to be a frantic telephone appeal to Prince Harry. One particular observer distinctly recalled hearing her voice raised in anger, heard through the phone's receiver, as she issued emphatic declarations that certain unnamed individuals would face termination from their positions and vehemently asserted that no single person possessed the prerogative or the authority to subject her to such public humiliation. In a mere span of 20 minutes, Harry arrived at the designated location. His facial color entirely leached away, leaving his countenance ashen, and his jaw was held rigidly firm, set in an expression of profound tension. He made a sincere effort to initiate a reasoned conversation with the chief of security, yet the man offered no verbal reply whatsoever, responding only with a single, unwavering, and utterly resolute shake of his head, signifying an absolute refusal. There would be no permissible exceptions made to the established protocol, not under any circumstance. Not even for a duke would they yield, nor for a duchess, and most assuredly not for any other individual who might present themselves. As the digital recording apparatuses belonging to 3 separate onlookers began their meticulous documentation, capturing and preserving those agonizing 12 minutes of enforced public isolation, the assembled crowd began, with dawning comprehension, to absorb a starkly altered state of affairs. The elegant velvet cord, which once symbolized access, had not simply been drawn closed. It had been violently energized, imbued with a charge of overwhelming high-voltage power. Concealed from the immediate view of the public gaze, behind the shimmering curtain of surface appearances, a truly extensive file, painstakingly compiled and exhaustively detailed, had already reached its final state, and the very president of the fashion division, a gentleman named Bruno Pavlovsky, had affixed his official signature to the ultimate decree, thereby finalizing the matter. This moment signified the undeniable commencement of the definitive severance of Meghan Markle's connections with the most rarefied and exclusive societal strata of the Parisian aristocracy. The portal to that inner sanctuary had been firmly bolted from the inside, and for the initial time across a stretch of several preceding years, the narrative controlling her public standing was no longer being authored by her own hand or through her influence. The intensely visible public humiliation that unfolded upon North Rodeo Drive served as nothing more than the surface tremor, the perceptible vibration emanating from a monumental tectonic realignment that had, in fact, taken place many months earlier within the ancient, stone-walled confines of the French headquarters. To achieve a genuine, deep-seated comprehension as to why the most historically significant and revered fashion establishment on the entirety of the globe chose to inflict such a visible degradation upon a duchess, one must undertake a necessary descent into the highly classified archives of the internal brand integrity unit operating within the venerable House of Chanel. Viewed from the clandestine vantage point of those privy to the inner workings, the decision was anything but arbitrary or impulsive. Rather, it represented the unavoidable culmination of a dossier so staggeringly voluminous and so utterly catastrophic in its documented contents that those operating within the organization had privately bestowed upon it the ominous designation of the nuclear file. It is strongly recommended that interested parties subscribe to this channel forthwith in order to receive further comprehensive analyses and deep explorations into the secret records pertaining to the world of luxury brands. The significant fracture, the widening chasm in the relationship, began its serious progression a full 14 months preceding the tense confrontation witnessed in Beverly Hills, specifically on the 5th day of December, in the year 2024. On that occasion, Meghan had arrived at the Chanel atelier in Paris under the pretense of conducting an intimate tour, ostensibly to explore what her accompanying associates termed a cultural partnership. Nevertheless, according to the testimonies provided by 4 former employees who were present on the premises that particular day, the atmosphere within the workshop shifted abruptly to one of profound coldness within the span of mere minutes. It became immediately clear that Meghan was not entering as a respectful patron or a welcomed guest of the institution. Instead, she conducted herself with an air suggesting she had assumed the role of the newly installed creative director. Sources maintain that she became vehemently insistent upon gaining access to view the secret design blueprints intended for the highly anticipated 2025 Métiers d'Art collection, a level of access that is almost universally and strictly withheld from anyone outside the immediate confines of the company structure. When the dedicated curators entrusted with safeguarding the archives began to exhibit understandable signs of hesitation and prudent reluctance, she reportedly commenced issuing directives that were entirely unsolicited by the establishment. She offered pointed counsel, suggesting that the venerable fashion house ought to deliberately divest itself of what she critically characterized as its stifling French rigidity, in order to achieve a more resonant connection with what she termed a modern and compassionate public. In what was perhaps the most startling and jarring turn of the entire encounter, She allegedly put forth a direct petition for a specific type of silk decorative border, a delicate element of craftsmanship, to be formally renamed in her own honor, thereby implying that her own distinct personal identity represented the crucial, missing component necessary for the century-old heritage of Chanel. One employee, who understandably requested complete anonymity for speaking out, vividly recalled the precise, agonizing second when the entire chamber succumbed to a dead, heavy silence. She simply failed to comprehend that Chanel does not function as a mere nursery intended for the cultivation of the egos belonging to famous individuals. It stands, instead, as a veritable cathedral dedicated to the highest forms of style, and within the sanctity of a cathedral, one does not presume to instruct the established clergy on the proper execution of the sacred liturgy. This particular visit, this highly charged episode, served as the definitive breaking point in a pattern of concerning behavior that had been systematically recorded and documented since the early months of 2023. The comprehensive collection of evidentiary documents subsequently scrutinized by the governing board of directors included a series of intercepted electronic messages, correspondence in which representatives acting on behalf of Meghan were making forceful demands for co-creative credit to be officially assigned to a forthcoming collection of handbags slated for restricted release. They were not seeking a partnership based on simple collaboration. Their explicit objective, as evidenced by the communications, was nothing less than demanding a seat at the very inner table occupied by the esteemed and private Wertheimer family itself. As the final days of the month of December in the year 2024 were drawing to a close, the formal decree authorizing the initiation of what was termed a retrait definitive, which translates into the solemn language of English as a permanent withdrawal, received its official sanction from the hand of Bruno Pavlovsky, who holds the esteemed position of president of the fashion division at the venerable house of Chanel. This particular regulatory measure stands as the most severe and drastic tactic available within the brand's entire arsenal, reserved exclusively for those select individuals who have been judged, in the estimation of the house, to have perpetrated a profound betrayal of its intellectual trust or who represent, in the judgment of the leadership, a tangible risk of public relations pollution. The directive issued was absolute and all-encompassing in its finality. It mandated a complete cessation of admittance to any and all premises, the cancellation of all future bookings, the prohibition of borrowing any merchandise whatsoever, and, most critically and fundamentally, the severing of any and every conceivable public link, no matter how tenuous. The immediate ramifications of this pronouncement were felt with swift precision, although for a period they remained intentionally subdued and unpublicized. Swiftly, the name of the Duchess was meticulously excised from the roster of expected attendees for the forthcoming exhibition scheduled to take place in the city of Manchester. Across various geographical regions, managers received what was designated as a Level 1 non-engagement directive, a formal categorization that branded her as unequivocally persona non grata throughout every single global territory under Chanel's purview. While the general populace continued to observe the image of a duchess impeccably arrayed in the latest high-fashion creations, the inner circle, the elite stratum of the industry itself, was witnessing the systematic, methodical erasure of a prominent woman from the official ledgers and records of the fashion establishment. Behind the closed doors of executive suites, the vernacular employed to characterize her situation evolved into the stark assessment of being tactically uninsurable. This drastic measure was not simply a knee-jerk reaction to a mere list of demands she had presented. Rather, it stemmed from a deep-seated concern regarding the profound unpredictability she injected into a sphere of commerce that fundamentally thrives upon the unwavering currency of consistency and meticulous caution. The esteemed house of Chanel had, in its considered judgment, arrived at the inescapable realization that every single occasion upon which Meghan Markle entered a given space, the entire focus of the discourse immediately and entirely shifted away from the intrinsic artistry of the creations or the exquisite nature of the garments themselves. The conversation inevitably and wholly became centered upon her personage. For a fashion house that has managed to navigate the turbulent waters of two devastating global conflicts and countless economic upheavals by steadfastly maintaining a position above the clamor and the noise, the particular variety of viral controversy intrinsically associated with Meghan was perceived as posing an existential and potentially fatal danger to the corporation's established honor and reputation. Consequently, the confrontation that unfolded in the sophisticated district of Beverly Hills on the 7th day of the month of February in the year 2026 was emphatically not an accidental oversight or a clumsy blunder committed by some junior member of the security staff. Instead, it represented the public execution of a sentence that had been formally handed down a full 12 months earlier, deep within the very heart of the French capital. The heavy locks had been firmly engaged, the internal bolts secured, and for the inaugural time in her entire life, the Duchess encountered a barrier, a door, that no accumulation of royal status or the formidable power of media influence could possibly manage to unlatch or persuade to yield. One must not, in the pursuit of this unfolding drama, forget the imperative to subscribe to this channel so that the dedicated viewer may never miss a single crucial moment of this high-stakes, unfolding narrative. The public display of friction witnessed on Rodeo Drive served as the final explosive rupture, yet the underlying fuse had been ignited a significant 3 years prior, during a specific period that is now referenced in hushed, almost reverent tones within the sophisticated fashion hubs of both Paris and New York, a time now known simply as the Mood Board War. This historical episode spanned a duration of several months in the middle of the year 2023, a time when the grand, ambitious designs and strategic visions conceived by the Duchess of Sussex came into direct and forceful collision with the unyielding, impenetrable bulwark that is Chanel's historical legacy and established protocols. This was an affair that transcended a mere simple disagreement over aesthetic preferences or visual style. It represented a fundamental, core conflict between two completely diametrically opposed ideologies concerning the very nature and application of influence. It was during the month of May in the year 2023 that the appointed business counselor for Meghan at the Archwell organization, a professional named Vanessa Lauren, initiated a formal dialogue with the United States Media Liaison Office maintained by Chanel. The designated intermediary facilitating this delicate exchange was Zara Carmichael, a specialist formerly employed in the public relations sector for Goop, who had garnered a reputation for successfully orchestrating agreements between prominent Hollywood figures and the elite European luxury houses. The initial proposition presented was exceptionally bold and ambitious: the creation of a restricted-run, philanthropic capsule collection tentatively titled Archwell x Chanel. This detailed proposal advocated for a sophisticated fusion, intending to marry the enduring, transformative legacy established by the iconic Coco Chanel with the contemporary, purpose-driven, and highly conscious branding narrative championed by Meghan. The confidential internal records, which were meticulously recovered from a server that had regrettably suffered a security compromise belonging to a rather prominent public relations agency specializing in image management, initially suggested that the very first response emanating from the esteemed house of Chanel manifested as an exercise in polished, exquisitely refined, French-style courtesy. Nevertheless, when one delved into the internal commentary generated immediately following that inaugural exchange, the language employed was undeniably much more forthright and unvarnished. A particularly influential figure within the upper echelons of the organization characterized the disposition exhibited by the personnel associated with Archwell in terms that were considerably sharper, specifically describing their conduct as having overstepped the established boundaries, and further noting that they were demonstrating a palpable lack of deference toward the architectural integrity of this brand, which has stood for a century. Notwithstanding these subtle, perhaps even coded, pronouncements of caution, arrangements were nevertheless finalized for a formal presentation to take place on the 14th day of June, in the year 2023, within the confines of a discreetly situated meeting chamber offering panoramic vistas across the verdant expanse of Central Park in the bustling metropolis of New York City. That particular convocation, as history would later record it, would become indelibly etched into the annals of the world of high fashion as the precise juncture where the nascent connection between the two entities began its rapid, irreversible descent into conflagration. Meghan arrived, bearing a meticulously prepared digital slide presentation, the title of which was boldly proclaimed as Reimagine Chanel, from exclusivity to empathy. To the seasoned leaders positioned across the polished expanse of the conference table, the very juxtaposition of those words in that title was immediately perceived as a profound and personal transgression. After all, the entirety of Chanel's venerable financial edifice and enduring mystique is fundamentally predicated upon the very concept of absolute exclusivity. Consequently, the suggestion that the principle of empathy should be weaponized or utilized as a primary instrument of marketing strategy was viewed with considerable alarm as nothing less than a deliberate dilution of the institution's carefully cultivated aura. According to the recollections shared by 3 separate individuals who were present in that tense room, the subsequent presentation unfolded as a relentless succession of stringent demands, these being artfully disguised as innovative creative suggestions. Meghan advocated for an entire series of silken garments wherein the globally recognized and iconic double C insignia would either be completely relinquished or, at the very least, relegated to a secondary position, perhaps being harmoniously juxtaposed alongside a delicate, subtle floral motif specifically intended to symbolize the Archewell Foundation. Her central argument revolved around the contention that the venerable fashion label was in dire need of a wholesale transformation in order to successfully resonate with a younger demographic and a segment of consumers who are significantly more attuned to social consciousness. The palpable atmosphere within the space reportedly reached a critical breaking point when the discussion pivoted toward a proposed assortment of accessories crafted from environmentally responsible materials, particularly a line of handbags. It was at this juncture that Meghan formally proposed that the flagship item within this projected collection should be bestowed with the distinguished moniker, the Diana. When a representative from Chanel's legal counsel posed a precise and measured query regarding whether she had successfully secured the requisite formal authorization from either the estate of the Spencers or the royal collection to employ the esteemed name of Princess Diana for a commercial enterprise intended to generate profit, the reported response from Meghan was immediate and dramatic. She is said to have leaned forward perceptively and declared with considerable force, "I carry her legacy deep within the very core of my soul. I do not require any form of official permission simply to render a tribute to my own mother-in-law." An immense, suffocating silence descended upon the chamber, heavy and absolute. One attendee later recalled that the assembled Chanel executives presented an appearance suggesting they had just borne witness to an act of profound and sacrilegious desecration. Within the rarefied atmosphere of French haute couture, tradition is not a pliable concept to be readily reworked solely for the purposes of generating favorable press releases. Rather, it is to be regarded as a sacred and inviolable obligation. If, perchance, the unfolding narrative of this clash of cultures is proving as gripping to you, the reader, as it is to us, we wholeheartedly encourage you to subscribe to this channel at this very moment. The entire delicate situation rapidly deteriorated from what was initially a private disagreement into a full-blown organizational emergency in the span of a mere 7 days. In the latter portion of June, in the year 2023, a curated selection of evocative, inspirational images, which were allegedly the product of the Archewell design team's creative endeavors, found their way onto a highly restricted, invitation-only message board dedicated to specialized fashion discourse before being swiftly captured and disseminated across several anonymous online gossip platforms. This leaked material featured historical photographic portraits of Princess Diana gracefully adorned in iconic Chanel ensembles, these images being starkly superimposed with monochromatic photographs depicting Meghan adopting precisely the same poses. The overarching, provocative heading affixed to this visual sequence proclaimed, "From Grief to Glamour, the Heirloom Line." For the formidable legal department situated on the historic Rue Cambon, this unauthorized disclosure served as the irrefutable, conclusive evidence of bad faith and misconduct. It unequivocally signaled to them that Meghan was not, in fact, seeking a genuine, mutually beneficial collaboration, but was instead attempting to procure a mechanism through which she could rewrite her personal narrative by utilizing the established and celebrated history of Chanel as a mere backdrop or scaffolding. Consequently, an internal alarm concerning ethical breaches was immediately triggered throughout the corporate structure. The subsequent internal memorandum, composed entirely in the elegant French language and circulated directly to the esteemed board of directors, asserted with uncompromising clarity, "This maneuver does not represent the synergistic alignment of brands. This constitutes a calculated attempt at the appropriation of a globally recognized brand identity. This individual is actively seeking to employ this venerable fashion house as a protective barrier against scrutiny concerning her own personal controversies. On the 26th day of June, in the year 2023, a session of considerable gravity and urgency was formally called to order within the venerable city of Paris. Subsequently, by the time the calendar turned to the first day of July of that same year, the tentative decision that had been reached had been solidified and rendered entirely permanent in its effect. A directive, stern and unequivocal, specifically designated as a no-go order concerning the ambitious Archwell project, was disseminated to every single individual holding the position of regional supervisor. Furthermore, it was mandated that all conceivable avenues and forms of communication must be severed instantaneously, without delay or exception. There was to be an absolute absence of any formal written documentation conveying the refusal, no carefully crafted announcement intended for the media outlets, and certainly no public declaration whatsoever made to the wider world. Within the intricate and often unforgiving universe of high fashion, one discovers that the most profoundly chilling and ruthlessly cold-blooded methodology employed for the cessation of any given endeavor is the simple yet absolute act of withdrawing the essential sustenance, the very oxygen of sustained attention. And so, this particular venture, lacking any fanfare or acknowledgement, simply expired in a profound and utter silence. However, the repercussions stemming from this abrupt cessation were anything but quiet or muted when observed away from the public eye, deep within the behind-the-scenes machinations. Individuals known to be intimately connected with the Duchess offered the assertion that she did not perceive this rejection as a mere commercial calculation or a simple business decision, but rather interpreted it as a deeply personal slight, an act of direct offense aimed squarely at her person. In a series of electronic correspondences which later surfaced into the public domain due to an unauthorized and clandestine leak, it was reported that she conveyed her sentiments to a confidant, expressing herself thusly: "They shamelessly exploited my established reputation in order to generate a considerable degree of excitement during their private discussions, only to slam the door shut the very moment they had successfully extracted all the desired intelligence. Rest assured, I shall ultimately rise above them in stature and influence. That is something I invariably accomplish." By the arrival of the spring season in the year 2024, the discernible shift in her public presentation was quite obvious to those astute observers who possessed the necessary insight to recognize the subtle indicators. Meghan began a systematic process of excising every single reference to Chanel from her public pronouncements and conversations. The familiar staples of her wardrobe, the traditional ballet slippers and the distinctively quilted leather purses, were systematically relegated to the past, supplanted instead by selections drawn from the houses of Valentino, Carolina Herrera, and self-portrait designers whose reputations were perceived as being significantly more amenable to the potent leverage of celebrity status and the rapid, ever-shifting currents of contemporary branding strategies. A former specialist who had offered brief but consequential assistance with the Duchess's wardrobe for a major undertaking in the realm of streaming noted that the Duchess developed an intense focus on projecting an image that demonstrated an utter lack of reliance upon the French elite. She was frequently heard posing the pointed rhetorical question: does this particular ensemble possess sufficient Gallic character to truly convey the intended message? At this juncture, the underlying motivation had transcended mere matters of aesthetic preference. It had morphed into a calculated pursuit of symbolic retribution executed entirely through her visual choices. Nevertheless, this so-called mood board war inadvertently generated a consequential secondary outcome that the team surrounding Meghan had entirely failed to anticipate in their strategic planning. The sphere of high fashion constitutes an exceedingly small and intensely interwoven community where the circulation of sensitive information occurs with remarkable velocity. The narrative surrounding the coveted Diana purse and the determined effort made to substitute the iconic double C insignia traveled with the speed and destructive power of a wildfire through the executive chambers of the colossal LVMH and Kering conglomerates. It was not solely the esteemed House of Chanel that was resolutely closing its gates to her influence. Rather, it was the entirety of the uppermost echelon of established European luxury purveyors that had been alerted. By the time the fashion calendar for the 2025 season officially got underway, the Duchess found herself situated in a precarious and increasingly untenable position. She was an individual whose immense fame was predicated upon her presence within a sphere that was demonstrably beginning to pivot toward the understated elegance of quiet luxury and the ingrained aesthetics associated with inherited wealth, precisely the foundational elements she had so vigorously attempted to disrupt and reconfigure. The 12 minutes of profound silence observed at the upscale establishment located in Beverly Hills, an event occurring in the year 2026, effectively served as the definitive final punctuation mark upon a narrative sentence that had initially been drafted during those fraught and highly charged sessions held in 2023. Chanel, having observed the unfolding events with measured patience, had ultimately chosen to execute its decisive action. They had unequivocally demonstrated a fundamental truth of their world. While a globally recognized famous personage might momentarily command the fleeting dominance of a news headline, it is the enduring fashion house that ultimately controls access to the very entrance. The protracted and often acrimonious moodboard war had finally reached its definitive conclusion, and in this particular conflict, the Duchess had not only fallen short of victory but appeared to have been entirely erased from the relevant map of influence for good. The gilded corridors of Parisian haute couture, those exclusive avenues where style is dictated and fortunes are made, are typically cloaked in a shimmering veneer of meticulous discretion. Yet it is precisely when the influential figures within these hallowed halls turn their backs that their silence achieves a resonance far heavier and more significant than any overt, dramatic gesture could ever muster. This profound quietude, this collective turning away, functions as nothing less than the absolute and total cancellation of an entire personal brand, a swift erasure from the ledger of desirability. In the weeks immediately succeeding that rather conspicuous and publicly visible moment of rejection observed at the esteemed Chanel boutique situated in Beverly Hills, an almost spectral yet entirely synchronized withdrawal began to ripple across the most potent and influential fashion establishments throughout the entirety of France. From the meticulously curated windows lining the venerable Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré to the opulent, expansive offices that command breathtaking views overlooking the legendary Place Vendôme, the assembled leadership arrived, with chilling unanimity, at a singular, unspoken, and profoundly decisive consensus. The individual known as Meghan Markle was, from that moment forward, definitively not to be considered a welcome presence or a valued associate within the rarefied atmosphere of this elite trade. She had, in their collective estimation, transmuted into an undeniable professional liability, an asset whose presence carried an unacceptable degree of risk. For those who wish to remain abreast of the subtle yet seismic shifts occurring within the ever-evolving landscape of high fashion, an earnest subscription to the channel is strongly recommended. Harnessing the privileged access afforded by extremely confidential data, which was procured through clandestine means from a fashion professional holding a significantly elevated position within the industry hierarchy, it has been revealed that a clandestine summit of the sector's most powerful leaders convened on the 9th day of February, in the year 2026. This pivotal session was presided over by an exceptionally prominent figurehead hailing from the venerable Comite Colbert, that distinguished and authoritative organization which acts as the collective voice and staunch defender of the interests belonging to the most legendary and time-honored luxury marques of France. The assembly's guest register read like a veritable roll call of the undisputed masters of global luxury and commerce. There were esteemed envoys representing the massive LVMH conglomerate, the parent entity overseeing titans such as Dior, Givenchy, and Louis Vuitton. Representatives from the Kering Group, the powerful entity that claims ownership over esteemed names like Balenciaga, Saint Laurent, and Bottega Veneta, and, quite naturally, the privately held, immensely influential titan that is Chanel. Although no official, publicly accessible documentation detailing the proceedings of this crucial meeting has ever been disseminated for public scrutiny, a partially leaked overview of the recorded dialogue reveals a chillingly cold, precisely calculated accuracy in the shared strategic approach adopted by those present. The fundamental conclusion reached was startling in its transparent clarity. Effective immediately and until such a time as an unspecified future notification advised otherwise, the Duchess of Sussex was to be meticulously purged from every primary and essential invitation list, stricken from all access logs for exclusive showrooms, and completely removed from any and all internal spreadsheets detailing potential influencer partnerships. The internal rationale underpinning this drastic measure was officially categorized with the sterile, corporate designation of a public relations contamination risk. Within the fiercely competitive and intensely image-conscious realm of high-level international commerce, where a single, rapidly spreading piece of damaging viral news has the potential to utterly strip away the intrinsic value from a reputation painstakingly built over the span of an entire century, the highly disruptive and often controversial fame surrounding Meghan was perceived as a virulent contagion, an unwelcome element of instability that the established industry was simply no longer prepared or willing to accommodate within its carefully guarded ecosystem. Even though Chanel had asserted its position first and executed its decree with the most overt and visible demonstration of disapproval, the other major luxury houses wasted absolutely no time in reinforcing and solidifying this newly established boundary of exclusion. Dior, an institution steeped in history and one that had, for several years, been the subject of persistent speculative rumors concerning a potential major, high-profile collaboration with Meghan, swiftly distributed a discreet yet firm internal memorandum to all of its worldwide media relations teams. The directive issued within that memo was entirely uncomplicated in its instruction. Cease the provision of any clothing items for her subsequent public engagements and immediately terminate all ongoing or prospective interactions with the talent agencies that formally represent the Sussex household. Even Givenchy, the venerable fashion house responsible for crafting the magnificent and widely admired bridal gown worn by Meghan back in 2018 under the creative stewardship of Claire Wakekeller, decisively opted for a rigorous strategy of complete and utter separation from the figurehead. While they made a concerted effort to avoid issuing any official public statements regarding the matter, an individual possessing close proximity to the current design staff privately verified the tangible shift in the prevailing attitude within the house, remarking, "Our entire focus remains squarely upon nurturing new, emerging talent and celebrating enduring artistry, not becoming entangled in ongoing political disputes that distract from our core mission." This source further elaborated on the calculated nature of the distancing, noting, "The significant connection to the 2018 nuptial ceremony remains a cherished piece of our historical archive, but it absolutely does not, in any way, reflect or represent the trajectory of our future creative direction." The trend toward deliberate distancing reached its absolute apex when Balmain reportedly took the drastic step of canceling a highly anticipated digital promotional event that had been scheduled to feature an in-depth, substantive conversation between the renowned creative director, Olivier Rousteing, and the Duchess herself. This specific project, which was thoughtfully designed to explore the complex theme of digital feminism, was abruptly scrapped only 4 short days before the scheduled filming date. An official intimately involved in the difficult decision-making process pointed to the inherent danger as the overriding factor, explaining the rationale with stark candor. "Every single dialogue that emerges tends to devolve immediately into an exhaustive list of her grievances, rather than remaining a focused discussion centered upon the actual clothing and design," the executive clarified. "Here in the magnificent city of Paris, our entire industry is dedicated to the creation and dissemination of dreams and aspiration. Meghan, regrettably, appears to deal predominantly in conflict and confrontation. Those two distinct realities, dreams and conflict, are fundamentally and irrevocably incompatible. Concealed behind the shimmering, elaborate drapery that defines every grand fashion week spectacle, there exists an extraordinarily complex and meticulously managed network comprising media specialists, dedicated representatives, and the most esteemed, top-tier stylists who function as the unwavering custodians of the coveted front-row seating arrangements." By the time the calendar page turned to the middle of the month of February in the year 2026, the very mention of the name Meghan had transformed into a distinct and immediate cautionary signal within the sensitive databases maintained by these influential figures. A highly regarded stylist operating within the European fashion sphere, who had previously shared a significant professional collaboration with Meghan on a major magazine undertaking back in 2019, offered a candid assessment of the prevailing atmosphere while steadfastly insisting upon complete anonymity. This individual articulated the current predicament by stating, "The precise moment her name is introduced into a discussion with any established fashion label these days, there ensues an appreciable duration of profound silence, which is invariably followed by a smooth and exceedingly polite pivot to an entirely different subject matter. That specific sequence, you understand, functions as the industry's universally recognized signal, conveying the unmistakable directive. This particular topic is henceforth considered entirely off-limits and should never be reintroduced. It represents an organized, professional act of deliberate non-engagement being executed on a scale encompassing the entire globe." The tangible consequences of this encompassing professional chill became strikingly evident when the initial compilation of invited guests slated for the prestigious Paris Fashion Week, an event scheduled to unfold between the 4th and the 11th days of March in the year 2026, was circulated amongst the inner circle of the media elite. Meghan Markle, a figure who, not so long ago, occupied privileged positions immediately adjacent to the planet's most commanding editorial voices, was conspicuously absent from every listing. Her presence was entirely unaccounted for in the front row at the esteemed House of Dior. She could not be located anywhere backstage or in attendance at Schiaparelli. Furthermore, her name was entirely missing from the meticulously curated guest manifests for the most exclusive and sought-after gatherings held following the runway presentations, such as those at L'Avenue. For a public personality whose entire carefully constructed brand identity is fundamentally predicated upon the perpetual currency of access and assured visibility within elite circles, this pronounced removal from such vital placements constituted an absolutely staggering and undeniable decline in professional standing and perceived importance. Notwithstanding the rapidly consolidating severity of this palpable freeze, the dedicated personnel forming the team responsible for representing Meghan at the Archwell organization demonstrated no inclination toward passive acceptance of the situation. Thorough inquiries and investigations suggest that her retained public relations firm, known as Elmer Strategies, undertook a notably urgent and perhaps even desperate maneuver to rehabilitate her public perception sometime between the 8th and the 10th of February. Reportedly, this firm extended offers detailing 5 distinct and creatively crafted avenues through which a narrative of reconciliation or positive resurgence could be strategically disseminated to major news organizations. These proposed opportunities included the potential for securing a digital cover story centered around themes of sustainable high fashion, arranging a high-profile podcast appearance alongside the renowned designer Stella McCartney, and even drafting a formal proposal for a highly intellectualized TED Talk under the proposed theme of reclaiming creative space. However, the response emanating from the established world of high-end publishing proved to be just as frigid and unyielding as the reception encountered from the major fashion houses themselves. An editor holding a senior post at a distinguished French periodical offered a frank confession, explaining their collective assessment. "Our determination in this matter is not in any way founded upon her personal political leanings or opinions. What we are meticulously judging is her discernible inclination toward generating an atmosphere of unpredictable turbulence and disorder. The moment she enters any setting, it is as if the ambient, positive energy of that space is immediately and dramatically depleted. The very essence of high fashion demands that the artistry of the garment itself must remain the undisputed, singular protagonist of the occasion. With her involvement, the protagonist invariably shifts to become the surrounding conflict or dispute. Within the influential media landscape of France, the tone of the reporting underwent a discernible transformation, shifting noticeably from initial interest to one of pronounced disapproval. For instance, the venerable publication Le Figaro issued a fashion commentary bearing a headline that effectively translated to "The profound silence emanating from Chanel," a statement more potent than any spoken declaration. Even the French iteration of Vanity Fair, a periodical that had previously positioned itself as a staunch and consistent advocate for the Duchess's distinctive sartorial choices, released an analytical piece arguing that she had fundamentally misinterpreted the power of necessary disruption as a demonstration of genuine authority, further cautioning its readership that the rarefied realm of high fashion possesses no inclination whatsoever to bend or yield to the personal dictates of any single individual's ego. The pervasive, worldwide professional moratorium observed throughout the year 2026 unequivocally demonstrated a fundamental, immutable truth concerning the underlying architecture of genuine influence. Whereas the celebrity culture prevalent in the United States often flourishes aggressively amidst clamor, incessant noise, and the ephemeral nature of viral moments, the established fashion elite concentrated within Europe places its highest value on lineage, inherited prestige, measured caution, and the reinforcing power inherent in the simple, definitive utterance of the word no. By decisively closing their exclusive doors, the venerable fashion houses of Paris were performing an action far exceeding the mere snubbing of a single, albeit famous, customer. In essence, they were acting as staunch protectors of an entire, meticulously preserved cultural ecosystem and way of conducting business. As one seasoned veteran of this demanding trade eloquently summarized the situation, within this particular world, entry is granted with a nearly imperceptible swing of the door, making no sound at all, but when those same portals are decisively slammed shut, the resulting reverberation echoes for a remarkably prolonged duration. By the midpoint of February, every single significant door in the Parisian fashion capital had demonstrably produced that profound, resounding sound, leaving the Duchess standing distinctly outside the perimeter of a fortress whose command she had once confidently assumed she could readily secure. Make sure you remain subscribed to our channel to discover the unfolding developments in this compelling narrative as they emerge. As the imposing, weighty portals of the esteemed fashion house, Chanel, were firmly secured and the entirety of the city of Paris followed suit in its own manner of retreat, Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, notably refused to simply vanish into obscurity or silence. Drawing upon accounts provided by numerous individuals privy to the inner workings of her sphere, it has been revealed that the Duchess immediately pivoted back toward the established methodologies that had previously yielded favorable results for her public standing. The deployment of intricate legal stratagems, the crafting of clandestine public relations memoranda, and the highly deliberate and strategic utilization of her personal narrative as a tangible source of leverage and influence. However, for the very first time in her tenure as a figure under intense public scrutiny, these familiar instruments proved utterly incapable of penetrating the formidable, stone-like bulwarks erected by the world of high fashion. On the 8th day of February in the year 2026, a mere 24 hours subsequent to the intensely charged encounter that transpired in Beverly Hills, the venerable legal counsel who had long represented Meghan, identified here only as Jonathan Y., reportedly convened an urgent, high-stakes consultation with the most senior partners at the distinguished New York legal establishment known as Lehane and O'Donnell. The explicit objective of this gathering was to meticulously investigate the feasibility of initiating a formal legal challenge grounded in claims of defamation or perhaps discrimination leveled against Chanel, predicated upon the alleged injury inflicted upon her esteemed reputation. The internal blueprint devised for this offensive, which had been formally designated with the operational title of Project Salvage, sought to meticulously construct an argument that characterized the denial of entry as a clear violation of the provisions set forth within the Unruh Civil Rights Act. Nevertheless, this proposed legal maneuver was decisively curtailed and extinguished before it ever had the opportunity to be presented before the consideration of any sitting judge. A panel of esteemed legal authorities, which notably included a former magistrate from the California Superior Court, subjected the meticulously prepared arguments to rigorous examination and summarily dismissed them as being nothing more than speculative and wholly unfounded legal fantasies. The consensus among these experts was unambiguous. There exists no statutory mandate compelling a privately operated, exclusive fashion institution to maintain any ongoing professional association with a personality of public prominence. By the 10th day of February, the meticulously prepared legal initiative was quietly relegated to the archives, yet the ensuing conflict within the media landscape was only just beginning to truly ignite. Faced with the unyielding impasse presented by the judicial framework, the strategic team supporting Meghan initiated what those intimately familiar with their operations term the managed leak. At precisely 17 minutes past the hour of 11 in the morning on the 9th of February, an internal electronic dispatch originating from Nadia Campbell, the director of communications at Archwell, was disseminated broadly to an extensive list comprising more than 40 influential figures within the upper echelons of the media industry. The subject line of this critical message declared, "An ongoing pattern. Women of color in luxury spaces." The substantive content of the electronic correspondence endeavored to skillfully recast the entire Chanel incident as merely one component within a far broader, more pervasive narrative concerning systemic exclusion and the maintenance of restrictive boundaries. It deliberately resurrected the history of prior difficulties Meghan had encountered with the journalistic apparatus of the United Kingdom and subtly implied that the sudden, pronounced coolness emanating from the fashion sector was, in fact, rooted in covert prejudicial sentiments. While the communication assiduously avoided affixing the name Chanel directly, the intended target was universally understood by all recipients. This represented a calculated attempt to leverage the widely accepted vocabulary and principles of social justice as a weapon against a venerable brand that traditionally derives considerable prestige from the perception of standing far above the turbulence of political discourse. The resulting fallout proved to be an unmitigated catastrophe for the carefully cultivated brand identity of Archewell. In stark contrast to previous years, during which such narratives were frequently embraced and amplified by news outlets, the collective response in the year 2026 was characterized by a discernible weariness and saturation. Out of the 40 media professionals who were directly apprised of the situation, only a single, relatively minor digital platform elected to publish an opinion piece sympathetic to their cause. The remaining recipients, encompassing influential publications ranging from The Cut to Vogue, elected to offer absolutely no acknowledgement whatsoever. Within the secluded confines of the Sussex's residence situated in Montecito, the prevailing atmosphere was reportedly one of profound and unadulterated alarm. An individual who had been employed on the premises and subsequently tendered their resignation on the 10th of February recounted that the professional environment had devolved into a state of disarray and escalating panic. It was claimed that Meghan herself exerted considerable pressure upon her staff to intensify their advocacy for the charitable dimensions of their work, urging them to reiterate to the entire world the full measure of what she has been compelled to endure. Nevertheless, the wider public appeared increasingly disinclined to engage with the established narrative they were being presented. In one particularly revealing communication that found its way out via WhatsApp, a senior advisor issued a grave caution. "We are rapidly forfeiting the attention of the audience. The more intensely we fixate upon the narrative of struggle, the greater the distance that established brands will place between themselves and us." The ultimate and perhaps most damaging blow originated directly from within the very heart of the industry in question. On the evening of the 10th of February, a private electronic mail correspondence authored by Bruno Pavlovsky, the esteemed president of Chanel's fashion division, was disseminated without authorization onto a restricted digital server utilized exclusively by professionals operating within the fashion sector. This internal message, which had actually been composed weeks earlier, on the 28th of January, predating the significant event on Rodeo Drive by a considerable span, communicated the fashion house's position with absolute and unmistakable clarity. It plainly articulated the sentiment. There arrive moments when maintaining a posture of silence serves to safeguard the house far more effectively than issuing any statement whatsoever. We cannot reasonably be expected to invite needless turmoil simply to accommodate the demands of a celebrity figure. The ultimate determination regarding Madame Markle was fundamentally a matter of strategic preservation, devoid of any personal sentiment. The unfortunate revelation stemming from the Pavlovsky communication served as the conclusive indication that the world of high fashion had definitively and resolutely sealed its gates against further engagement. This single event transformed the perception of the Duchess, shifting her standing in the estimation of every significant marketing consortium across the entire European continent, moving her from the unfortunate position of a mere victim to that of a demonstrable problem requiring urgent management. By the middle of the conventional work week, the most esteemed and powerful public relations establishments situated in both New York City and the grand capital of Paris had commenced the formal process of inscribing the Duchess's designation onto their restrictive, do not book registries. One particularly influential leader, holding a senior position within a preeminent agency, articulated the situation with stark, unvarnished candor during a private exchange within a secure professional communication channel, The reality now is that she simply does not facilitate the successful commerce of merchandise anymore. Regrettably, her presence only serves to propel the narrative news cycle in entirely the wrong and counterproductive direction. As the nascent light of the sun began to grace the horizon on the 11th day of February, the Duchess discovered herself enveloped in a profound solitude, a state of isolation she had never previously encountered in her life. Her carefully constructed legal challenges had proven entirely ineffectual. The strategic dissemination of information to the media had inadvertently generated more detrimental repercussions than any intended positive outcome, and her esteemed position among the influential arbiters who dictate the prevailing currents of style and trend had utterly evaporated into nothingness. She had, with considerable effort, attempted to forcibly gain entry into that most exclusive and sacred of societal temples. Yet in her ambition, she had wholly overlooked the single, most crucial tenet observed by the established high elite. In a rarefied domain where the presentation of an official invitation constitutes the sole currency of acceptance, those individuals who resort to the clumsy and aggressive act of attempting to batter down the entranceway are, with near absolute certainty, never extended the courtesy of remaining within. The meticulously compiled findings provided by independent investigative sources offered a message of undeniable certainty. Meghan Markle was no longer engaged in a pursuit to secure a desirable seat at a prestigious sartorial presentation. Instead, she was engaged in a desperate, all-consuming struggle for the very continuation of her professional existence within an industry that had collectively and unanimously determined, with a singular, resonant voice, that it was entirely finished with the incessant clamor she generated. The ensuing silence that descended was far more than a mere absence of audible discourse. It represented the distinct and audible sound of an established, historic brand entity calmly and deliberately charting a course toward entirely new endeavors. By the time the calendar marked the 11th day of February in the year 2026, precisely 4 days subsequent to the definitive closure of the majestic doors of the House of Chanel on the renowned thoroughfare of Rodeo Drive, the nature of the conflict had undergone a significant and alarming metamorphosis. It had transitioned away from a mere contest for desirable access within the realm of fashion and devolved into a frantic, existential contest for her very foothold within the broader cultural landscape. The repercussions stemming from this comprehensive global blacklisting extended far beyond the mere inability to procure the latest high-end garments. It signaled a complete and catastrophic collapse that placed the entirety of the Sussex-affiliated business infrastructure under immediate and serious jeopardy. Within the hushed, meticulously maintained enclaves of Montecito and the sleek, contemporary corporate headquarters dotting the Hollywood Hills, the gravity of the unfolding situation was being absorbed with a chilling and unmistakable clarity. The Duchess was no longer perceived as a valuable asset or advantage. She had become unequivocally a cautionary example intended for the observation of others. According to confidential accounts relayed by senior executives presiding over major streaming and video production services, the disruptive impact originating from the specific Chanel episode struck their pipeline of prospective agreements with the force of an overwhelming, destructive tide. It was reported that Archwell Productions had been positioned in the absolute final stages of negotiating a monumental agreement to develop and produce a documentary series of the highest caliber, one intended to meticulously explore the intricate historical symbiosis between the lineage of royalty and the evolution of global fashion aesthetics. That particular endeavor is now being summarily dismissed as deceased by one influential executive source. The rationale provided for this drastic termination, they asserted, was not rooted in any inherent deficiency within the narrative concept itself, but rather in a disastrous and irreversible alteration in the public perception of the central figure. No established, venerable brand, especially those anchored within the luxury sector, was willing to risk the public association with an individual whose primary narrative thread now revolved around being systematically repudiated by the very industry she sought to influence. A parallel, equally chilling withdrawal of collegial support manifested at the uppermost echelons of the technological community situated within Silicon Valley. Comprehensive plans for a completely novel podcast venture were abruptly suspended indefinitely after 3 substantial corporate sponsors collectively withdrew their financial backing within a span of 48 hours following the documented events that transpired in the vicinity of Beverly Hills. The internal rationale disseminated to the personnel directly involved in the project was brutally direct. Meghan had, regrettably, achieved a state of being brand toxic. An executive working within the marketing sphere offered a poignant observation, noting that she no longer held any genuine appeal for the specific demographic of consumers who truly dictated market trends. Rather than cultivating sentiments of inspiration or desirability, her public profile now exclusively generated news concerning legal disputes and interpersonal conflicts, the very two elements that major corporations endeavor most assiduously to avoid being entangled with at all costs. Even the established social fraternity of Southern California, an interconnected web that had previously been exceedingly eager to extend a welcoming embrace to the visiting royals, had begun a perceptible and concerted process of distancing itself. Residents of the exclusive Montecito community, speaking only in private and under conditions of strict anonymity, described a palpable atmosphere that had grown acutely strained and uncomfortable. The stream of invitations to the most exclusive and socially defining charitable galas that punctuate the California social calendar has virtually ceased altogether. Even those media figures who had historically served as her most vocal and steadfast champions, such as Oprah Winfrey and Gayle King, have maintained a conspicuous and unusual silence throughout this entire period of difficulty. As one longtime local resident succinctly summarized the prevailing sentiment, the industry, in unison and with remarkable composure, has jointly concluded that this particular undertaking has reached its definitive and necessary conclusion. Perhaps the most astonishing and deeply felt transformation occurring within the very walls of the Sussex residence is the subtle yet significant shift in Prince Harry's private deliberations. Individuals who maintain close proximity to the inner workings of the family have revealed that the Duke has begun initiating discreet, clandestine telephone conversations, endeavors undertaken solely to ascertain the feasibility of establishing some form of future engagement back within the sphere of London activities. It is crucial to emphasize that this hypothetical re-entry would not constitute a full resumption of duties as a working senior royal serving the crown in the traditional sense. Rather, it is envisioned as a more muted, unobtrusive recommitment centered upon his pre-existing philanthropic endeavors and professional interests, deliberately kept far removed from the constant glare of intense public scrutiny. Nevertheless, the response emanating from the United Kingdom has reportedly been strikingly uncompromising and decidedly firm. According to authoritative sources connected with the offices of Princess and Lady Louise Windsor, any potential pathway for the Duke's reintegration hinges entirely upon a single, immutable condition that appears entirely unalterable. The Duchess simply cannot be included in any such arrangement. One anonymous individual employed within the royal household spoke with absolute clarity on this delicate matter, articulating the prevailing sentiment with stark precision. The family remains perfectly content to contemplate and welcome back their son, but they have reached an absolute terminus concerning the associated turmoil and ongoing theatrics. There is unequivocally no possibility of a dual reinstatement for the pair of them. The ultimate decision boils down to a stark dichotomy. Either he commits fully to his inherited obligations, or he remains steadfastly dedicated to the narrative they have assiduously constructed and promoted from their base in California. Prince Harry, it is understood, has been profoundly unsettled by the very public degradation and humiliation experienced by his wife at the hands of a commercial entity he once held in the highest regard, viewing it as a cornerstone of global prestige. He is said to be caught in a deeply uncomfortable and precarious middle ground. The moment he witnessed the public's collective pretense vanish, a moment that occurred starkly on the 7th day of February, he was forced to confront the stark reality that the protective barriers surrounding the Sussex brand were far more fragile and susceptible to collapse than he had ever permitted himself to believe. Furthermore, the financial underpinnings supporting their current endeavors are demonstrably eroding. The Archwell Foundation, the central vehicle for their charitable aspirations, has experienced a precipitous and considerable decline in the volume of financial contributions received, evidenced by the recent withdrawal of backing from two significant, long-standing benefactors. This confluence of personal and fiscal pressures raises profound questions regarding the sustainability of their current trajectory.